Start?
How did this start? I think it actually started in a conversation between Roger Alistair Audsley and myself. One of the things about the Alliance is it's a non-for-profit, and we have to find funding. So I had the idea that we might choose to have some collaborations between the watch brands, and one of the really impressive things I think we've both found with the Alliance is how people are much more prepared to talk and share information with each other, having an alliance as the sort of glue for that. And so, having decided that's not a bad idea, the first person I thought of that, and I put my hand up in the air and said, "Look, we'll kick it off." Who would be a really good partner to kickstart this into life? And we'd known each other for some time.
Yes.
I knew that the process would be, or I hoped I knew the process would be an enjoyable one, and that you would be keen to participate, and so it was. And contacted you, and you said, "Clear off, Mike."
Absolutely.
Why would a great brand like Fears want to sully themselves and have anything to do with Christopher Ward? Fortunately, I was able to convince you otherwise. I think it was several glasses of champagne, and the whole thing started from there, really.
Well, because I do remember there was because it was. The Alliance started during the pandemic. We were having a lot of Zoom meetings, with the founders of the Alliance. And I remember on one of those where I think it was a sort of Christmas drinking session where we'd all there comparing how our years had been, having a few gin and tonics over the camera.
Yeah.
And I think you had obviously had the conversation about maybe doing a collaboration watch or things like that. And then I think on there, you sort of jokingly suggested it. Going, "Oh, well, why don't we make a watch together?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds good." And then afterwards, I remember you sent an email going, "Actually, shall we do this? Would you be up for this?" Yeah. And I remember being like, "Oh, wow, I thought it was a joke," because I was thinking collaborations, everyone assumes nowadays collaborations happen all the time. But this has actually been, quite a lot of work in the making.
Yeah.
And if you go back to when we were first talking about this, watch brands collaborating with each other. I mean, yes, you collaborate with, designers, retailers, but two brands coming together, even today, it's rare. Very rare.
Very unusual.
And I suddenly thought, wow, he wasn't joking. He actually meant it. And I mean, I've over the years, as I've got to know you more, I realise, if you suggest something, it sounds joking, but you are a man of your word. You're going to follow through with it and say, yeah, let's make this. And so at that point, I said, in myself, my company was very tiny at the time. It still is today. But I spoke to my couple of team members and I said, should we do this? This sounds amazing. This would be great. We could create something. But also, one of the reasons I was so pleased to be invited to join the Alliance early on is for many years I've realised, the industry is stronger together. If the brands are talking to each other, that's just more benefit. And also, it's a case of if the industry rises, it brings us all up with
Absolutely
it.
Right.
Absolutely right. 6 years ago when I restarted my company, I realised it wasn't about just how can Fears succeed. It was actually more about how can the whole industry succeed. And so with this, I was like, well, this makes perfect sense. It will get people's attention on British watches. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We will make a beautiful product together. And also,
we hoped.
But there was also a bit of thinking, actually, as someone who runs a company, how fascinating it would be to work with another much larger British watch company. And it's one thing working, you and I working together, but having our teams working together.
Yeah.
And I thought this would be fascinating for my guys and girls to learn, like, from someone who has, you know, has been around for longer and is a larger organisation.
We first met at I think the launch of another brand's.
It was Savile Row.
Savile Row.
At My Tailor's.
Was it that?
Yeah, it's My Tailor's, yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that's how I got introduced to that tailor's, by going
You
to
have a tailor. This is impressive. But we met there, and I don't know, sometimes there was you'd only just started.
I was about recently. 1 year in,
Yeah, and we connected immediately, I felt. You may not, but I felt...
No, I definitely did.
And the enthusiasm and the passion that you had for what you were doing really sort of resonated very strongly with me. And so we kept in touch on an ongoing basis from that.
Well, I'd always had a thing of, if I ever met the owner of a watch brand, especially a British brand, I would always try and follow up with an email and say, nice to meet you, and, you know, it'd be great to sort of grab a coffee, grab a beer, you know, and chat. Just because, you know, this is all pre-alliance and going, well, actually, it's useful to just meet other people in the industry.
Yeah.
And more often than not, people would never reply. You replied within about 20 minutes saying...
That's because I've got nothing better to do.
You know, I remember seeing that email and go, oh, wow. And you were suggesting some dates and saying, do you want to come down to Maidenhead? Do you want to pop in?
Yeah.
You know, let's chat. And I was just blown away by your openness and your friendliness and your, you know, willingness to connect. And I thought, right, okay, yeah, like, this will be wonderful. And, you know, I had known and been aware of Christopher Ward right from the beginning. I got into watches in the early noughties. And so, of course, when Christopher Ward launched, I was aware of it.
Yeah.
And when I started working as an apprentice at Rolex in 2011, it was just at the period where some brands were dipping their toe into online. But of course, by that point, you were almost about to celebrate your first decade of retailing online.
Yeah.
And I always remember thinking, you know, wow, you know, if I ever run a watch company, you know, online will be such a major part of how we're able to even begin to start. And for that, we have to thank Christopher Ward, because you pioneered it in a way when a lot of people wouldn't. And I thought that was interesting. But also, when I then was focusing on restarting my family's business, you're suddenly going, oh my goodness, you know, you start off, for me, one person, you know, how on earth could this ever grow? And I remember reading interviews with yourself and Peter, and, you know, you're talking about you're starting off with, you know, 3 people, you know, and, you know, 4 people, and one watch.
Packing the one watch we might get in that week.
And you know what? It is...
Fighting each other to get to be the one who wrapped it.
Who's got the sellotape and the packing label.
Something to do.
But, you know, for someone at that stage, it was literally just me, you know, working from home, doing all those jobs. And it was very inspiring to read that. And at the time, in 2016, looking at, well, you've got your, you know, your head office, showroom, you've got teams, you've got departments. And, you know, and so when we met in person, I was very much like, I'm in awe of what you've created and done. But also the fact that you had... While doing it, your messaging had been very consistent. You know, it was always very positive. It was slightly cheeky. It was very British in that sort of irreverent way, rather than being British in the obvious way. And so when we met, and then you said, you know, let's talk, let's meet. You know, as you say, you know, I straight away realised we got on well. You know, I was like, actually, I think we could become friends. You know, you know, as well as having business things to discuss, we had other things in common, and. You know, I still remember the first time I came where we are today, on Park Street, and after we'd had a cup of tea and had a chat, you very kindly gave me on a tour and, you know, introduced me to people, different departments, and, you know, room after room. And if people are ever lucky enough to have a tour here, they'll see this. And I remember just being blown away by going, wow, you know what? I one day would like to have this sort of thing. You know, this is very inspiring for a much smaller brand earlier in their journey. And I go, it's also done properly. It's done in a right way. You know, people are enjoying working here. You know, it's not just about making the watch. It's about doing things properly and the right way. And I go, yeah, actually, that's the sort of thing I want to achieve.
Well, I mean, that's very, very kind of you to say. I mean, I think for me, what was clear from day one with you was, as I say, an enormous passion, knowledge, and a curiosity. And actually, one of the things that I think the Alliance is about as well, which came a few years later, is about encouraging that sort of passion for watchmaking that you clearly had. And it is, I completely agree with you. I think it is genuinely a responsibility for businesses like us to encourage people like you. The fact is, it wasn't going to be a wasted effort, because the things even that you were doing even then in terms of design were, I thought, exceptional. And what has happened over the course of this last several years is the handwriting of Fears has become so pronounced and so obviously the perfect representation of what you're trying to achieve as a brand.
Thank you.
As well as the friendship, it seemed absolutely right that, and I thought we could create something very special between us. If we joined forces, and because it's a meeting of minds, and it's a meeting of equals. So yes, we're a bit bigger than you, but that's not what it's about. It's about finding people who are equal and have the same point of view. And as I say, the Alliance, one of the really great things about the Alliance is that I think we're all discovering people, brands that we never knew existed.
Yes.
And the hunger and the desire to grow the British watch industry is incredible. And if we can do anything to facilitate that, then why wouldn't we want to do that? And this collaboration is just a small part of that, but it will encourage, and it's called the Alliance 001. And the reason it's given that denomination is because we see and hope that this will be the first of many of these sorts of collaborations over the course of time.
And it's, it is that, you talk about the meeting of minds, that's the thing, a true collaboration isn't saying, oh, this brand would look good with this brand. It's actually about the people going, we naturally want to do something together. And I think there's, things that you can bring to the table, things I can bring to the table, and that's how it works. And I think that's what we've achieved here.
And it was great fun as well. And the other thing it has to be, the long time ago, there was a guy called Robert Townsend, who at the time was CEO of Avis Cars. And he was the guy who developed the line We Try Harder. But he wrote a book. It was my first ever business book. Okay. And I always remember buying it. I was like, I just started off. And the title of it was, If You're Not in Business for Fun or Profit, What the Hell Are You Doing Here? And that's been a maxim that we've kind of lived by. Now, in this case, there's no profit for us. The profits all go to the Alliance, which is great. But my goodness, we did have some fun. And I knew we'd have some fun doing it as well.
And I think it's also interesting from my side because, as I mentioned before, two companies working together. Yes, we've worked on it personally, but also, our designers, your designers, engineers working together. I can already see how it's changing how we think and how we approach things by having worked so closely and seen how your teams work. And, especially with the design, the fact that a lot of that came from the Christopher Ward side, but interpreting the Fears DNA.
Yeah.
And that for me was fascinating because, you're mentioning about my passion for things. I'm always very protective of the Fears name and how it looked. And I still remember at the time thinking, oh, wow, this is going to be really interesting to see how something... But I still remember sat in the first meeting here and your team were presenting it, and I could tell they were almost a little nervous.
They were terrified. They weren't just nervous. Very difficult thing to do, to present back to you a watch that's going to carry the name Fears on it. That was I can tell you, they were absolutely terrified.
But I still remember the moment we opened the document, started going through it, I was just like, this is incredible, because you get when you're designing, and in a company, especially with a physical product, you're very much in your sort of world of how you design, how you think of it. And it was just so incredible to see someone else's basically interpretation and it being so spot on, but absolutely nothing like I would have imagined it. But the more we look at it, the more you see it, the more you go, oh my goodness, this is wonderful, because it shows, for me, it made me personally feel very proud that we had created a sort of DNA that is flexible enough that it doesn't have to be like, oh, it's always got to have these certain identifiers. Actually, it's the feel of the watch. And that's just been the best thing. And then when coming to, working to actually do the engineering and building it, I think it's been fascinating to see, our engineers both working with each other, and they're kind of going, oh, well, we would normally do it this way, but I'm open to suggestion. You know, I think this has been a full, true collaboration.
A proper collaboration.
Yeah.
It's been a really valuable experience for our people as well, because you very rarely get the chance of doing something like this. Yeah. They were frightened, but actually I do think, and one of the tests, we've both done collaborations with other people. Right. One of the real tests of a great collaboration is when it's finished. This is one of my tests for it. Would I want that to be going into into our normal collection?
Yes.
And I think when you said I'm proud of this watch, this would fit into our collection, and it may indeed give opportunities beyond the collaboration. Then that something's happened. The magical elixir, the alchemy that happens sometimes when you put different elements together, creates something special. I think this is a very special watch.
Fundamentally, a good watch, if you remove the logo, the name, everything from it, the story, what's gone into it, if you look at the watch itself, it should stand on its own 2 feet.
Yeah,
and I think that is something that we've absolutely created together.
Yeah.
Is something that you just hold up and go, we're proud of this, and the story, the collaboration, everything behind it is wonderful. But the main thing itself is key.
Yeah, so I think it was challenging for the reason that we wanted to take the Fears aesthetic, but then try and make it as clean as possible for the jumping hour. Often with things like that, you're tempted to add too much to the design. So we wanted to make sure that we focused on textures rather than kind of more elements.
I remember when it started, it was all kind of you do a little bit your standards. I mean, you do your research with jumping hours, and we had a lot of variant that was kind of looking like something existing, and that was the challenge. Is you don't have lots to play with, and you still want to do something unique. I don't think at that time we really care if it was Fears or not. We just wanted to do something that looked unique and nice, and the Fear touch came, I think, after with Nicholas.
I think, and also designing a simple watch is far harder than designing a complicated watch. So that was, I'd say, one of the bigger challenges.
Yes.
Paring everything back but keeping all the proportions correct. So you felt like there wasn't too much empty space, but it worked for the design.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was also, I think, nice for Nicholas to see how we do the product on our side, because I don't think it has the same process. Probably a bit more structured, if that's fair to say. No disregard to him, but just because of the volume and the quantities that we do, is more of an artisan type of watchmaker, where he's a bit more volume like.
Yeah. And something else that we were quite excited about for this design was the case. So we knew that the case was going to be a new case for Fears. So they've just released the 40mm just before this comes out, and we knew we'd be using that case, so we were quite excited to use that. We also wanted to find a way, as well as on the dial, but on the back, to keep everything very minimal.
It was also good to work with the designer from Fears to have the right font and tweak the sizes, especially on the jumping hour, where when you have the numbers from 1 to 9 is not the same than 10, 11, 12, where you need to resize or de-size, just that these look nice. So
it's changing the size whilst trying to keep the visual weight the same. But I think it's something else that adds to the Fears aesthetic is the colour. So it's very similar to a colour they had done on a bespoke project, I believe, before, that we all quite liked. And so we thought that really matched their aesthetic. And then Nicholas has managed to find a strap that matches almost perfectly with the colour of the dial.
I must say, he has done an amazing job. Like as much as I was saying that we are a bit more structured, we tend to struggle way more to get the right match between the straps and the dial sometimes than what he done. Probably something to learn from him. Or maybe struggle and he didn't tell us. That's possible.
Just straight face.
So let's have a look at the watch itself.
Why not?
Let's see what we've created here. Now, there's lots of things about the watch that people will immediately notice and go, oh, that's very distinct. But I've got to share with you my favourite part of this design.
Oh, yeah.
My favourite part is actually the ring around the outside of the minutes. And the reason I love this is, to me, sort of true luxury, true sort of almost decadence, is when you have the ability to use space and you don't. You pull back. I call it wasted space, the luxury of wasted space. And I think it's that really comes alive here, because we could so easily have decorated it. We could have so easily put something there, some motive. But actually, by just keeping it sort of clean and empty, it just brings something pure about the design. And I think that was the thing when your designers first were showing me the concepts. That was something present in all of them. And I think actually thinking, what was it that kind of made me go, oh, that's not how I imagined it would be.
Yeah.
And I think it's that use of space.
Yeah.
So with the dead space, the temptation is just go for a very bright, overt sunburst. But actually, by using a matte varnish, we were able to just tone it down and give it this very sort of, it feels almost like silk, and then it means that the focus is on the center, which, because of the concentric guilloche, has a much more vibrant sunburst, but again, without it being too polished, too overdone.
For me, one of the key things that makes the design of this watch so strong is that when you think about collaborations between two watch brands, if one wants to, if you're looking to combine both brands in the aesthetic of the watch, I think you're in dangerous territory. And it was very clear from the outset that the way we were talking, that we wanted this to be, Fears is proudly on the dial. And what the role we wanted to play was helping with the design, if we could, but also provide the engine for the watch, the movement. And I think part of the reason that this has, and it may be a good template for others to follow, ? That actually there has to be a lead design and a lead brand in this.
Yeah.
And so it worked really well that that Fears became the lead in terms of the look of the watch, and we provided the engine.
Yes.
And I think because it's a jumping hour, it's allowed that space, that negative space, to be used in a really sort of intelligent and an aesthetically pleasing way. And less is nearly always more in terms of design, and that's not untypical of your designs anyway. I think about the back plate. Famously, you have nothing apart from a beautiful finish on your back plate. We deep stamp most of ours, or have something if they're not exhibition case backs. And the beauty of this is that it's again the Fears approach to life, and it's a beautifully finished backplate. But then the thing that I like most about this watch in some ways is actually on the back, because it's this pleasant surprise of the 4 engravings that we've got on each of the lugs, which are a bit special, I think.
But they're almost like I can't remember which person it was described them, but almost like an alliance hallmark.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's got the 4 bits of key information: the 2 brands, the alliance, and the addition.
And I remember that was definitely your idea. I think that was it. No, I'm pretty sure that was. I thought that was an inspirational sort of addition to the watch. It just is often. The secret of great design is that it surprises somewhere.
Yeah.
And this is full of little touches and surprises, like the inner ring, as you say.
Yeah, so this is using Bristol leather, so leather that is made in our home city of Bristol by Britain's oldest vegetable tanner. And what makes it particularly nice is Fears worked with that tannery back in the 1920s. Wow. And so it's our oldest supplier that we've rekindled a relationship with.
The other thing that I always think is separates the really very, very, very good from just average is the quality of finishing, and I think the quality of the finishing of both the dial and the case here is, well, it's a Fears trademark. Your finishing is of an exceptional standard, and this continues that sort of journey into the sort of finishing of your watches. But it absolutely stands out.
Well, you mentioned about the finishing, about it is something which and this is frustrating, especially when yourself and I are selling watches online. Photos can convey so much. But really, it's when you hold it, when you feel it, when you look at the mirror polishing, how completely smooth it is. The brushing on the top sections of the cushion case.
Yeah, it's
the way that's done is it goes onto the lathe, it turns, and each case, then someone goes on there and puts the brushing on by hand.
Yeah, I must say, I love the cushion case.
Yeah.
I think it's just it's it's got that sort of slightly retro feel to it that just is really appeals to me. It's so precise, it's so beautifully mirror polished where that's required. The execution, I think, is superb, and I think the case. Well, I know the case was from your manufacturer in Germany, I think.
Yes.
We helped with the dial and the hands, and I think they've come together in a beautifully cohesive way. But it's that level of finishing. And I think you were quite a little surprised, if I'm not.
Yes, I mean, I had high hopes because I knew the different, the case maker, dial maker. I knew we were working with, as we always do with the top people. This was going to be beautifully made. But I think even when you look at the renders, even if you look at the 3D models, until you hold it, until you feel the weight of it, until you see how the light catches the applied ring on the dial. I think, on photos, when you look straight on, you go, oh, it's got a silver ring. It could be printed.
Yeah.
But what you don't realise is this is a proper machined ring with different finishes, bevels, and the way it joins with the ring around the window.
It's beautiful, isn't it? And the transitions are
it's got a flow. But these weren't easy to do.
No.
I mean, this is the sort of thing, you go to the dial maker and say, hey, we'd like to do this. And you can see the look of fear in their eye, where they're just going, but we've never done anything like that before. To get that precise shape, machined, milled and finished. And, to actually get that beveling, it involves a lot of handwork to get it just right. And then the subtlety of the sunburst in the dead space, you could go for a very obvious sunburst, but actually it's going, well, no, let's tone it down and let's use a particular type of matte varnish that helps bring the colour and the vibrancy through without it looking flashy.
Yeah, I completely agree.
That would be too obvious.
The other thing about this is, and I don't wish to sound like a watch snob here, but the audience who are able to purchase this, it is an audience that will really appreciate the level of detail and expertise that's gone into this watch. They will see the execution here is of a very, very, very high standard. Not everybody understands that, but I think this audience definitely will.
Look at this. This is the inside of the case back. No one will ever see this other than the watchmaker. It's still finished. The rotor is still finished to the high crystal.
Well, it's one of my favourite stories of watchmaking that Patek, even to this day, polished the underside of their dials.
Yes.
And nobody's ever going to see the underside of their dial, but they insist on doing it. It's that sort of attention to detail that I think is always quite kind of awe-inspiring, at least to me anyway.
The other thing about this watch, of course, is at 40.5 millimetres diameter, it's incredibly wearable. So
very wearable.
Apart from anything else, it's very comfortable in wear, but it's also most wrists will find this beautifully accommodating. So it's almost the perfect size. I mean, around 40, 41 between the two. This is sort of the sweet spot these days for we're finding anyway at CW.
I mean, one of my colleagues, when they first saw it, the team have slowly been shown it, because we tend to, with projects like this, we keep quite a lockdown, only a few people know. And, at Fears, we called it Project GB.
Yes, that's right. You gave the name. You gave the name to Project GB. Quite right.
But when one of my colleagues saw it the other day for the first time, held the first watch, and they said it's got this weird thing where it feels like I've seen something like this before. It's almost got a slightly sort of Edwardian, sort of decadent feel, but at the same time, it feels like something from the future.
Yeah,
it's got this very weird play between.
What a metaphor for the Alliance.
Exactly.
It is a true metaphor for the Alliance. The other thing I like about it is and I wasn't sure until quite late in the process, the placement of your name.
Yes.
It's quite an interesting place for the name, but it really works.
Having the name up there and then England at 6, and because this is the thing, you know, we're so used when we're designing watches or creating watches, you know, they have 2, maybe more hands. 12 is at 12, 6 is at 6. But, you know, just as with the Bel Canto, you know, something like this, it suddenly changes the rules. And you're going, well, there isn't an obvious place to put the name. And I think that works. But I'm pleased with the fact that, you know, when you're wearing it, yes, it is the collaboration. Yes, it is the Alliance watch. But actually, when you put it on the wrist, I think it's a watch you could wear it every day and just enjoy it, enjoy the feel of it. You know, and I think that's why I'm so pleased.
So would you be proud to have that in the Fierce collection?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, even though we will, you know,
our job here is
exactly. You know, this is a watch. I'm very pleased that, you know, the pre-production sample will be going into the Fierce archive.
Yeah.
You know, so this will be sitting alongside watches dating back to 1846.
Wow.
And so I'm very pleased that this will actually be on display in the Bristol showroom in our archive display.
Oh gosh, that makes me feel very proud as well. Gosh. To be part of, very special. To be part of the history of Fierce is no small thing. Thank you. That's great. Honestly can't remember how we decided on using caliber JJ01, the jumping hour caliber, for the movement. What was the genesis of that?
Well, I think it came to when we were discussing, right, you know, we would do a collaboration, and it naturally seemed right that it would use a Christopher Ward movement, or, you know, our module. But why this one? I think it's simply, I had years and years and years ago imagined that one day there could be a Brunswick watch that incorporated a jumping hour. It's I mean, it's not technically a complication, but it's one of those slightly more sort of, I'd say it's on the more romantic scale, a bit like a chiming watch. You know, it's something where it has a practical use, but it's not as sort of tool-like a chronograph or something.
Yeah.
And I thought that would suit not only Fierce, but it would also suit the shape of the watch. But I think when we were first discussing this, you hadn't used the JJ01.
Well, it's been rested for a little while.
Yeah.
And I think what will happen as a result of this collaboration is we'll probably bring it back out at some point, because it's reminded us of how accomplished a movement it really is.
Well, I know that when I first came and met with yourself and the designers about this project, it was fascinating because I arrived and suddenly you had previous jump hour watches that you had made, but you also had the movement, so I could see how the movement worked.
This is where it's so different from a date disc, because it's a whole disc then held in place by screws. I mean, the sort of detail of that, but then I guess there's quite a lot of torque driving it. And
there is, yeah.
That was the thing. It was when you explained to me about the fact that, you know, it jumps absolutely on the hour.
Well, one of the I'm not sure we've ever done as good a job marketing this caliber as we should. Originally designed by our then master watchmaker Johannes Janker. We're going back now 11, 12 years, and Johannes was, you know, a genius watchmaker. He's now the technical director of Sellita. Worked with us for a number of years and developed the JJ calibers as well as Caliber SH21. Not a man to have lack of ambition in terms of watchmaking. And when we determined that jumping hour would be a really great movement for us to develop, and it's the module that sits above. The base movement is a Sellita SW200, and what Johannes created was a module that sits atop that. And no, he just didn't want to create a jumping hour. He wanted to create the most accurate jumping hour that ever existed. Yeah. Now, it's probably quite difficult to prove or disprove that. However, when you realise I would describe it as genius, in that what he's done is, over the course of the hour, most jumping hours produce power in one spurt. Yeah? What this does is during the course of the hour, it transfers power piece by piece by piece. So you then get this very accurate and smooth transition. So it turns exactly at the hour. And if you go and look at, and we did, if you go and look at jumping hours elsewhere, you'll find that they're always either just before, nearly always just before, or just after. Yeah. This strikes absolutely on the hour.
And it sounds a bit weird because it's literally just changed the hours you've been holding it. But it makes a beautiful sound.
You assume it's with watch parts that you just put it all together and it all runs, but actually things have to be calibrated, they have to be adjusted. And I think this is, it's literally behind the dial. These are the things people don't see. But this is the skill of the watchmaker, making sure everything does line up and make sure it does go together. And especially when adjusting the hand and putting the hand on, this isn't about two hands lining up with each other, which is visually very easily. With this, they've actually got to make sure that the hand is lining up on that exact spot where it turns.
Yeah. Exactly right.
When I was here, I saw the movement and I had a play with the previous Christopher Ward models that had used it.
Yes.
But it was when it was holding it like this, and you see it in the Fears case and all this, and you turn it, and it's a feeling. It makes a noise. It makes a very kind of definite click.
Yes,
but it's also the way that it does it bang on 12 or 60 minutes. And for me, that's something that, I can sit here and talk about it, but until you actually hold it and experience it, it's one of those small things where people say, well, how when you pick up a watch, how does it feel quality? This is often one of those sort of layman terms. Basically, like, how do you know it feels solid? It's a proper watch. And for me, that is exactly it. It's that way it moves. As you're turning the crown, the smoothness of it. Yeah. And I think a lot of people assume a jump hour is like a date. It just moves. It's not at all. And of course, it's changing, 24 times a day.
Yeah, and you're right. It's one of the key aspects of how you can determine the quality of a watch. It's that level of engineering.
And I think when you look at this, there is that feeling that, everything is just put together. But did you just see there? The way, as it changes, the way the mirrored, polished rim suddenly reflects the new number.
I hadn't, but now you pointed out, it's another little surprise, isn't it?
Yeah, when you in that final bit where it's then just turning.
I hadn't.
And actually, that was something that both the designers noticed, because as it changes the reflection.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, lovely.
And they're the only, you can't CAD model those. They're the only things you notice when you build the watch and see it.
Yeah, it's got to be a physical thing to see that.
I've been in the watch industry for over 12 years now. I was a watchmaker for 5 years at Rolex. I still, every time I see a balance going backwards and forwards, it just is...
It is mesmerising, isn't it?
It is.
It's one of the great things. What we're seeing here is really the SW200, because the module sits atop the 200, and it's a relatively small number of additional components, and isn't all great design. Back to the less is more philosophy. Isn't usually great design, limited in terms of the execution. It's not about throwing lots of things, including the kitchen sink, at something. It's about how you can get to the end result using the least number of components. And that was, as I say, Johannes Janke, who originally designed the module. That was his philosophy, and that is his raison d'etre. That's how he does stuff. And so it plays perfectly into this jumping hour module.
I do love the way the rotor is done with that beautiful deep engraving and then the twin flag.
Yeah, no, yeah,
so
yeah,
good
yeah,
on there.
Yeah. It's nobody will ever see it.
No. We've kept it in a very sort of elegant way, a very sort of British way, very understated. You flip the watch over, and on the back of the four lugs, you've got the logo for the Alliance. You've got the Fears Pipette logo. You've got the edition number, so 01 to 50. And then you've also got the Christopher Ward logo. And actually, this was quite a funny story. So the case was made by one of the Fears case makers in Germany, and when we sent them over the drawings, and then they said, "Oh, and what are you doing the engraving?" So we sent them over the design file, and I then get a phone call from the owner of the business, a lovely chap, and he calls me up and goes, "Oh, I've got a slightly awkward thing to say. We may not be able to engrave all the images." And I said, "Oh, why not? Is there a problem? Is it the artwork? Assuming it's a technical problem." And he goes, "No, one of the images, I don't know, it's actually the logo for Christopher Ward. And if we put it on there, we will, we'll get in trouble because it's their trademark, it's registered." And I started laughing, and he's going, "Oh, what's so funny?" I said, "Well, the watch is a collaboration between the two brands, so it's fine. I said it's absolutely fine. Of course we're allowed to use the logo."
I'm going to sue you instead.
And then we sue. But then, in the most wonderfully sort of correct German way, he said, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. Could you still send me a signed letter confirming this?" And then you take me exactly. And so there I was, writing this letter and signing it and DHLing it out to Germany. But I think it was, for me, it's lovely because it's going, actually, our logos are recognisable. But also, what was interesting from him was...
Well, I was so pleased that he recognised that logo. I mean, that was great.
But then he's suddenly going, "Oh, this is wonderful. It's quite unusual to watch brands collaborating." And I think, when you're this way into a project like this, you kind of take it almost for granted, going, well, actually, this is two watch companies collaborating. And so often it will be a watch brand and someone else. So I think that brings it nicely together.
I think one of the things it demonstrates as well, which is potentially quite powerful, is that us coming together with this beautiful new Fears watch with a Chris Ward movement in it, a genuine collaboration, in a way demonstrates that this isn't just a sector, it's actually a community, and it may be that this is the first physical representation of that. There's been a lot of words, we have a website, there's all we have open dials, we talk to each other more than we ever did before, but this is perhaps the first physical representation of this community, and a community is quite a powerful thing if it's as close as it can be in the future, and I think this is a pretty good start.
Yeah, absolutely. For all the larger companies, you've then also got all these much smaller companies starting out in their journey. Some of them, are one-man bands working from home. But what they're doing is they're contributing to the British watch industry. It's always this thing when you talk about Britain. We've got a very strong identity as a nation.
Yeah.
But there's so many things that people will always point to. Red double-decker buses. The telephone boxes. Black cabs. All kinds of very obvious objects, but actually, and I think this is something we're beginning to see more of, is people are beginning to understand what is kind of the true British ethos. And, yes, those are things, but they're representations of what being British is. And actually, when you look at our companies, the way we run them, but also the way we design our watches, there are certain design sensibilities that we adhere to, and it results in very different watches. But it's what I think I've always been saying for years, that British watches have an overarching feel to them that you don't get with Swiss watches, you don't get with German watches. And I think what it is yes, you've got that sort of purposeful function, but actually it's got a certain gracefulness to it. There's little elements that aren't designed deliberately to be whimsical, but I think it's something that you see in British design. And actually Terence Conran once said that. He said that the British design sensibility is graceful yet purposeful function. And it's true. And what we've managed to do is, I think, show it. People would go, "Oh, it's a watch from the Alliance British." A lot of people would actually expect it to have, the Union Jack emblazoned across the dial, or to be in certain colours that are very British, and
and maybe to be packed in ermine, because
exactly.
Because I do think one of the things that this also represents, in terms of the way Britain can be, is that innovation comes in many different ways, doesn't it?
Yes.
And actually, what we've done, I'd like to think, and what the Alliance is about, is innovating how a sector or a community, as we've just described it, can actually come together to do things differently.
Yeah.
So, in a way, it's not like the rest of the world's watch industry, because this is unlikely to happen. It's unlikely, I think, I might be wrong here, but it's probably unlikely that Rolex are about to announce a collaborative watch with, I don't know, Omega. What do you think?
Right.
What are the chances of that? That's not going to happen. Therefore, one of the ways in which we are doing things differently in this country, and definitely have the capacity to do so, because I do think we are innovative as a country, is actually create the space and the environment where two brands can come together who are in some ways competing with each other in the same marketplace, but actually, as you've said several times, by coming together we will all benefit.
Absolutely.
That is very unusual, that is innovative, and I do think innovation and a step into and a foot in the future rather than a foot in the past, which has often been the way the British watch industry has been represented, is really what the Alliance and this watch is about. This is about the future of watchmaking in the UK, and not just about the past, even though we recognise the value of a wonderful traditional past.
That's the thing. We have in Britain such incredible heritage and history in watchmaking. That's wonderful. That's what's kind of, built a lot of the industry in the past. But, there's a lot of things going, well, what's going on tomorrow?
Yeah.
Because that's part of the story that, yourself, myself, and the other trade members are doing. We're writing those next chapters. And as much as we can be, sort of harking back to what's happened in the past, that's obvious. I would rather more of the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than making, a museum gift shop piece, I would rather make something which actually, can stand on the international stage and go, this is actually good, not just because it's British, but because it's a good watch that has happened to come from Britain. And, that's what we're beginning to see, and I hope people will be encouraged to work towards.
Well, in its hope, in a small way, essentially this, we hope, is a signpost to the future of British watchmaking. In a small way, we wouldn't overstate it, but it's a good stepping off point.
Definitely.